Okay, so one of my students, one of my international students, wrote up their PhD and submitted it with literally 3 hours left before they would have been removed from the course. It was a horrendous last few months to get that done, and what was submitted was certainly not as good as it could have been. Now, in some ways, this is unavoidable when someone really isn't suited to doing a PhD, but ultimately a lot of the kind of responsibility falls on my shoulders, because what I wasn't prepared to do was set key milestones at each point and really critique the work as it was coming in. Now, a couple of years before, I knew that the work really wasn't up to standard, that it was going to be a struggle. But instead of really putting in hard and fast guidelines and making sure that the student had maybe the training they had to do, or really digging into why they weren't doing enough work, why the work wasn't of a good enough standard, and why we weren't seeing that normal kind of increase and normal kind of learning curve that you see during PhDs, why it was just very similar to what they had done in their first year. I let it kind of slide. Now, that doesn't mean I just stopped meeting them. It doesn't mean I stopped reading their work. But I wasn't hard enough on saying, right, this chapter now has to be completed at this stage, and if it isn't, that there are consequences to that, and make sure that they were just focused. So now, when it feels like this is happening, when it feels like the PhD isn't on track, I firstly simplify everything, make sure they're not doing any teaching, make sure that they're not doing any extra activities whatsoever, including any superfluous PG skills, any conferences, any trips, anything like that. Make sure they're solely focused just on their core PhD. We give them one role to do, one either experiment they have to complete or one piece of work they have to write up, and we make sure that's done properly, and then we move on. Now, if you don't get, in the end, a full amount of PhD from that because you focus so much on one thing, at least you've got a very good MPhil to submit. At least they will get something out of it. And ultimately, if you're running to this type of structure, then if they don't get a PhD from that as well, then ultimately they were never really going to get a PhD. So I'd say that was one key mistake I made early on, and one that I've learned from.